All right, welcome to Halitics on Wednesday. Two more episodes, two more programs this week after today, and then I'm off for a week. So, taking the second week off this summer, looking forward to a little trip to the beach, and definitely deserved, especially by my wife, not as much deserved by me. 240-363-7190 when I'm live. Please call in. I think that's what makes this program, I hope, a little bit unique, kind of stand out among the crowd of, is it millions, perhaps tens of millions of live streams of YouTube programming. I talk to you. I take your calls. You may not agree with me. You may disagree with me more than you do anyone else on YouTube, but you can express that view, and I promise I really won't mock you. I won't make fun of you, no matter how much I might disagree, no matter how much I might feel that we've made clear over time that your position is incorrect. I'm still not going to make fun of you. I'm still going to try to engage with you on your terms, as long as we can have a civil, respectful dialogue in which we both are willing to listen to the other and both willing to change our minds, change our opinions, change our expressed views, which is so important. Well, one thing I have, that willingness, right? We don't always have to change our mind. We just have to be willing to. We have to be willing to listen to other people. And I think that also makes us a lot more persuasive than just those who beat the same drum over and over and over, which I pretty much do. I mean, I don't deny it. I pretty much beat the same drum over and over too. So there it is. But I am willing to listen to you. I am also willing, and I have changed my opinion. I actually kind of have come to a different view to a degree, or at least I'm certainly willing to reconsider my view on something I spoke sort of dogmatically about a few weeks ago. I'm not going to get into it today, but I will just billboard this because at some point I'll get to it. Maybe Friday, maybe in a week plus, right, when I come back from that week off next week. Hoping to have Arlen. Apparently Arlen is going to be joining us starting in August. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we'll have a little more debating than we've had, because Arlen and I really we don't see eye to eye on the political circumstances. I believe he pretty much thinks the Democrats are on your side and we need to elect them because the Republicans pose an existential threat. I think the duopoly, the two parties together, two sides of the same coin, the same neoliberal coin, same neocon warmonger coin, they are the existential threat. And only by changing course completely, not just by shifting slightly to the left, we have to actually turn this ocean liner around right quick and elect Dr. West president. I think otherwise, really, it's curtains, right? It's kaput. So Arlen and I really disagree. Hopefully we'll get into that. Here's the guy. Oh, and I wanted to just tell you, so I've kind of become a little less dogmatic than I was about certain trans issues. I've been critical of the trans activists, the trans rights movement. I think they've been too insistent on their being right, too unwilling to hear dissenting voices. And I took that position, especially when it came to, and I take that position, especially when it comes to sports, college sports, even high school sports, professional sports, the Olympics. I think that biological sex should be the determining factor in which, where you compete rather than gender, right? That you say you feel you may have even undergone gender affirming physiological care. I still have always taken the position you should compete against people who are your biological sex. One of the factors that played into that was the success that Leah Thomas had competing against bio women. Leah Thomas, a trans woman competing against bio women in the Ivy League. And I had a conversation with one of the friends of the program about this, Mike Hirsch, and he corrected me. He pointed out that Leah Thomas's success really wasn't that dramatic, that she really didn't post such incredible times. And I don't believe she set any world records whatsoever or even college records. Maybe one, I'm not sure. After that conversation with Mike and looking at Leah Thomas's record as a woman, comparing it to her record before transitioning and when she competed, when as a man, Leah competed against men, we aren't seeing perhaps the dramatic improvement relative to competition that I had expected. And that's really made me rethink. I'm not fully there yet, but I just wanted to let folks know. I talk an awful lot about this gentleman. I believe he is our last best hope. I thought Bernie was in 2016. I still believe he was our last best hope through 2016, and things have gotten significantly worse in many ways, in many areas since then. And I believe they would have, regardless of who had prevailed in the general election in 2016, absent, of course, Jill Stein. But between the two duopoly candidates, I don't think there was really any real, it was a terrible choice regardless. I think in 2020, Bernie was the best choice. I think he dropped some of the economic populism that we needed from him, and that was one of the reasons he was not successful in 2020. I also think clearly the corporate establishment was against him, and the media defeated him as well, but Bernie really didn't perform at the level I expected he would, and I think that's also a factor in why he was unable to wrest the nomination away from a corporatist in 2020, just as he was unable in 2016. All right, in 2024, next year, I don't think we should consider either of the duopoly candidates as an ally, as a friend, and I believe that both are bad to the extent that it doesn't really matter given the cataclysmic crisis we're facing when it comes to the climate. The New York Post, to its credit, this is Dateline July 15, 2023, to its credit, has platformed Dr. West, and they have this headline with the picture of him that I've copied and pasted, but they misrepresent pretty blatantly what he actually said. According to the headline, and they put in quotes, crime against humanity, which is accurate. He did use that phrase. But the entire headline is clearly over the top. It does not accurately, does not fairly represent what Dr. West said. Cornel West says, per the Post, Biden committed crime against humanity against Black Americans. That is not what Cornel West said. That's not what Dr. West said. Let's get into the exact wording, the exact verbiage, because I think it's important to be completely accurate. This is the most important office in the world. The most powerful person in the world is the President of the United States. And when we consider candidates, I think it's very important that we know what they said, why they said it, how they said it, especially if the media, as is generally the case with the Post, is tendentious, is presenting a view that represents the wishes of the owner, who happens to be, I'm pretty certain, the owner of Fox News, right? The Australian guy, I guess he's now a U.S. citizen, Rupert Murdoch. And Murdoch will platform Dr. West because he doesn't like Joe Biden probably and would prefer that Trump win over Biden. So he figures if I platform West, maybe that'll hurt Biden. And I'm like, fine, good. I don't care. Hurt Biden all you want. Biden's awful. Biden's approved more pipelines, more drilling than Trump did. So I'm not going to sit here and be, I'm not going to have a lot of concerns if you hurt Joe Biden. That's not really one of my worries. But I am worried if you unfairly, inaccurately represent what Dr. Cornel West said. What he actually said here is that Joe Biden contributed to a crime against humanity when he became the architect of the mass incarceration regime in the 1990s. Now, that is a perfectly fair, perfectly accurate description in my view. He did contribute to a crime against humanity. Did he commit the crime on his own? I mean, that's clearly the implication, right? The Post wants you to think West is accusing Biden of some sort of horrible war crime that puts him in a league with a Hitler. And I think that crime, that Omnibus Crime Act that Biden co-sponsored in 94 was a very, very, very wrong-headed, very misguided, cruel. It was certainly appealed with the goal of appealing to a degree to racism in the American public, to target law enforcement against Black Americans predominantly. It did all of those things. Would I say that because he promoted that bill, he committed a crime against humanity? Maybe not. But I would absolutely say that he did, yes, Joe Biden did contribute to a crime against humanity. And therefore, Dr. West is right. He's correct. And he's the only person to say it. Perhaps even more so than Bernie. Bernie was kind of a little bit compromised because he had voted for that Omnibus Crime Act. I give him a pass to a degree because the act was supported by many African-American lawmakers. It did have some positive features. There was a little bit more money in there, especially to help victims of violent crimes, particularly women. And it would have been hard for Bernie to vote no under those circumstances. But, he had many, many criticisms of the legislation at the time, and he made them known. West doesn't have to worry about having voted for the bill and looking perhaps hypocritical or Monday morning quarterbacking or something of that sort, because he spoke out against it at the time and continues to. So he contributed to a crime against humanity. Now, this is important because we're determining who we should elect as president. And we often see people on the left, Democrats, Democratic establishment figures, often attacking Trump and Trump supporters as racists and saying if you are anti-racism, you have to support Joe Biden. But Joe Biden himself is a major reason we have the systemic crisis facing African Americans in this country. He was an architect of the mass incarceration regime. And perhaps it's fair to call him the architect. He was the main sponsor, lead sponsor of that bill. And let's get into what exactly that legislation did and how it has proven to be so harmful to America, and most particularly people of color in this country, African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, bearing the great brunt of this terrible legislation. So this is from the Brennan Center, obviously named after the great Supreme Court Justice William J. Brennan, one of the most progressive justices we've ever had. Race, Mass Incarceration, and the Disastrous War on Drugs from the Brennan Center, and Unraveling Decades of Racially Biased Anti-Drug Policies is a monumental project. So I say this to you because if you really claim to be, because you're going to hear a lot of people say, well, if you support anyone but Biden, you're a racist because you're helping elect Trump. But the fact of the matter is, if you vote for either duopoly candidate, either duopolist, you're voting for somebody who's clearly responsible for terribly unfair, unjust, racially biased results, including many more Black people in prison, a very high percentage of African Americans versus whites in prison, even higher than Asians, more Blacks in jail than in college, than with college degrees. That's where we are, in part because of Joe Biden. So those who demand that you vote against Trump by voting for Biden lest you are a racist, they've got a lot of explaining to do. They've got to be able to justify the enormous increase in incarceration levels that resulted from that 94 Act and the specific implications of that bill. So our author, I forget let me get his name right, Ketchy, I believe it's pronounced Nkechi Taifa or Ketchy Taifa, here telling us about that crime bill. And he is an expert, somebody who has long studied American criminal policy, and he tells us about what were those specific implications. So Ketchy tells us, Taifa, I have a long view of the criminal justice punishment system in the trenches for 40 years. Heartily surprised when the original architect of the war on drugs, John Ehrlichman, working for Nixon, revealed in 94. The same year, by the way, and I think that's very relevant, that the Biden bill was passed, he revealed, Ehrlichman did, that the war on drugs, which the Biden bill tracks, which it follows on, which it amplifies and doubles down, triples down on, was actually racially motivated to criminalize blacks and the anti-war left. This is something, by the way, that Veronica told us, Veronica Wright from the National Center to Legalize Drugs. She was on the Coalition to Legalize Drugs. She was on my program last week, saw her over the weekend. She talked about this a lot, that the war on drugs was clearly a racist policy. And it was a policy that Joe Biden tripled down on in 1994. And we're still living with the victims, the victimization that resulted of that war. And that the war that was exacerbated was made worse, clearly made worse by Joe Biden. So again, if you support Biden, you're supporting racist. You're supporting somebody who certainly was. I hate to use the term racist to describe him because I don't know what's in his heart. I can only talk about what he did, and what he did had terribly negative implications for black and brown Americans. And what were those specific implications, according to, again, Ketchy Taifa from the Brennan Center? And what is he telling us happened? The bill itself led to 100,000 new cops. And that might not necessarily be awful, because it does, we want more police to protect us. But those police were in the service of the large expansion of the federal death penalty in modern times, gutting of habeas corpus, evisceration of the exclusionary rule, including, and in terms of trying kids, 13-year-olds as adults, and an explosion in racial profiling. So these are all the implications of the war on drugs as it was amped up on steroids by Joe Biden, by Bill Clinton, by Hillary Clinton. You can't separate Republicans and Democrats neatly, as I know so many of you want to do, and say, well, the Republicans are fascist. A prison state is fascist. The bill that the Democrats passed, that Bill Clinton lobbied for, President Clinton, that his wife spoke in favor of, included an astronomical rise in prison construction across the country. You just cannot, as much as those of you want to believe that the Democrats, for all their flaws, you'll admit their flaws, are somehow less, that they're really on your side in the end, that they're the anti-racists. It's just not true. The evidence doesn't support it. So I want to get into some specific statistics, because for me, all of this is bad. But what we really want to look at is the number of people, I believe, that the crime bill incarcerated. And I looked at a number of studies. So one particular study, this is from the Council on Criminal Justice. And their claim, and apparently it's true, what their focus is state incarceration, state prison growth, the number of people locked up in state prisons. Actually, the number continued to rise, and that is that blue line in the middle. It crosses the red line, which is more jagged in 96. In 1994, we saw the highest growth rate. In other words, the number of new state prisoners, or the total number of state prisoners, the annual growth rate. In other words, the number of new prisoners versus the number released or dead or who died, reached its highest level. Nearly 80,000 new state prisoners in 94. And that was before, of course, the crime bill. And then you saw the number of new prisoners, the annual change, the annual growth start to slow. You still saw growth. There was growth in the total number of state prisoners until about 2010. So the crime bill, at a minimum, helped the number of prisoners in state prisons continue to increase, but at a slower rate for 15 or 16 years. So maybe you're saying, oh, that's not so bad. At least the growth rate was starting, they bent back the growth curve. That's for state prisons. So that figure kind of makes Biden look not so bad. But let's continue to look. Here's the total number of incarcerated from 94, 95, right? That's that red line, the vertical red line. That's when the crime bill, and I put that in there, when the crime bill was passed. You have three main venues where we have people locked up in America, incarcerated. As of 94, the number of people for the next about 15 years, 20 years, grew in federal prison by a very significant rate. I mean, if you look, it was virtually zero, virtually nil in the early 20th century, and it climbed to about 40,000, nearly 60, 80,000 by the end of the 2010s, around 2010. Local jails continue to see a very significant increase in growth. In other words, the number of people arrested continued to grow, at least until the mid-2000s. And the people in state prisons also continued to grow at a relatively significant rate, as we discussed. So the total number of Americans in prison was at a not at any kind of inflection point. Again, the 1994 crime bill, which Biden championed, saw a very steep growth following its passage, at least till about 2006, 2010. Joe Biden has to take ownership of that. At least, 600,000 more people in jail. And that was after a very, very high level. And many of those folks were aging out, were dying from earlier, and they were being replenished. So what Dr. West said was flat out correct. Joe Biden contributed to a crime against humanity, a particularly crime against Black Americans. And I don't know how you can square voting for him with the claim that you have to vote for Joe Biden to be an anti-racist, to be supportive of the Black community. It just isn't true. There's an African American running who's always supported the Black community. He's always supported poor, struggling, and working Americans of every race, every color. That's who he champions. So I don't get any argument for really for anyone at this point who's running for president except for Dr. West. And if you want to say, and I know a lot of you want to say, well, Biden ain't great and you're making good points, but look at how bad Trump is. He's that much worse. He's that much worse. Is he really that much worse? Obama deported more people. That's criminal justice, right? He deported more people than Trump did. Biden is trying to lock people up at the border too. So getting around this just, make your arguments, please. Let me know, 240-363-7190, why you think I'm wrong about this. Why you think that it's Biden we have to vote for to show our solidarity with the African American community. Here, one more chart, all the incarcerated in one chart. This includes prison at the top, jail in the middle, and then federal prisoners. And you can see that peak. There was no slowing. There was no deceleration. The very, very sharp upward trend in the number of incarcerated Americans, I believe about 50% or close to 50% of whom are black, even though the African American population is 12%, 13%. So if you were African American, you were, I guess, 8 times more likely to be incarcerated than anybody else, than people who aren't black, and more again than in college. So if you think that these charts don't bespeak a very powerful argument in support of Dr. Cornel West for president, tell me why I'm wrong. 240-363-7190. When you factor in all of the places where Americans have been locked up, the crime bill was a very significant reason that rates continue to just climb at a very steep rate for at least 15 years after its passage. It's ugly, it's wrong, it's fascist. It's fascism. And that was fascism that continued under Democratic and Republican administrations. In this case, passed by a Democratic Congress and signed into law with the support of a Democratic president. All right. Crime, criminal justice, a very powerful reason why we need to support Dr. West for president. I presented this, I promoted this program today as one that will discuss the climate crisis, the climate cataclysm. And I quoted Dr. West because he's the one candidate who's talking about the catastrophe for what it is. And he called it is a catastrophe with a capital C just a few days ago. I'll play a clip for you. Hopefully we'll get that at the very end. It was still processing when I started the program. But I want to just spend a little more time now talking about just how bad that cataclysm is, why. And yesterday I told you, I talk a lot about animals, not just human, not non-human animals. Let's talk about orcas. Talk about those wolves of the sea. When I was in Washington State just a few weeks ago, and there's a pod of orcas that live in Puget Sound, and I believe they also go out into the Pacific a little bit, but they're focused in that Puget Sound region. They're called residents, southern resident killer whales. They're the northeastern Pacific southern resident killer whales. So it's the northeastern Pacific and the southern resident, which is in the Puget Sound and also right outside. They go out into the Pacific. They're called residents because they don't migrate. Other pods of orcas swim, vast distances along the coast of California and also on the eastern, the western side, of the Pacific, China, Japan, and the like. So the population of this northeastern Pacific southern resident orca pod or killer whale pod has been shrinking. Even though some of those orcas live to be about 100 years old, apparently there's an orca out there who's about 100 years old. And the older ones are doing okay still because they're very smart, they're canny, they're savvy, they know how to hunt very well. The problem is they're not being replaced by juveniles who just aren't being born, aren't surviving. The female orcas don't give birth when there's not enough energy in the form of food. And these resident killer whales don't really have a lot of options available to them because they've evolved to just eat salmon. There have been so many salmon in the oceans. It's such a successful, it's kind of like mice, right? Like a lot of different animals live on mice. If there's hawks, all sorts of birds, raptors eat mice, but lots of others do too. Foxes, wolves, if they have to, if they can't get anything else, they'll eat vermin. Maybe not so much mice as rats because they're bigger, but voles, same kind of animal, rodents. So the salmon, which they're different species, there's king salmon, there's Chinook salmon, there's chum salmon, which is kind of the crappy salmon that nobody wants to eat. But those salmon are in rapid decline. And because of that, the killers are having to live off of their fat, their blubber. They're not getting enough energy to offset the energy it costs to swim around in a still relatively cold ocean, although it's getting warmer. They're dying. Just that simple. So this magnificent species, two magnificent species, the salmon, one of the most delicious fish you could ever eat, that's sustained for tens of thousands of years. Native Americans, the indigenous peoples. Bears, grizzlies, they're hunting in the rivers. There's salmon-eating wolves. All those animals are now at grave risk. And the salmon are smaller too. There are fewer of them and they're smaller. So folks, that's where we're going with this climate catastrophe. And again, who gets it? Who understands it? Well, Dr. West is the one who understands it. And that's why I support him. We'll talk about Dr. West, but before we get to Dr. West, I do want to present, and I always like to platform my great friends at Climate Defiance. Some of them are now in jail or they just got out. They took on, again, the Biden administration in the form of the Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo. I have been a long-time opponent of Gina Raimondo. She was formerly, I believe, governor of Rhode Island. And in that capacity, she privatized or did everything she possibly could and did privatize to a degree the retirement funds of Rhode Island workers, which led to massive fees paid to her fellow Wall Streeters. She's a creator of Wall Street, came from maybe Goldman Sachs, I could be wrong, one of the big banks. And now she's Commerce Secretary. She's a neolib writ large, Washington Post, big fan. So here are our good friends. I'll give you a little more on Gina Raimondo and why she was targeted. Actually, let me just see if I can get that right now before we play that video for you. Gina Raimondo, board member of the XM. Okay, there you can see it. I thought I was going to be able to put it. So she's a board member of the Export-Import Bank of the U.S. In 2001, the Biden admin told federal agencies to stop funding many new fossil projects aboard, but the bank did not stop that, continued to fund those projects with 27% of the XM Bank. And of course, this is, her boss is saying, hey, stop it. I guess it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. 27% of their portfolio. And this is, by the way, in direct opposition to what the UN IPCC, International Panel on Climate, on the Climate Crisis says. They flat out said You can't do it. You have to stop any public funding. And of course, export-import is a government entity, government organization. So they're financing these fossil fuel projects, 27% of their work. And the IPCC, and this is even after Biden said stop it, IPCC highlighted public finance for fossil fuels as severely misaligned with reaching the Paris goals. So we've heard, again, how the Biden administration is better than, let me just go ahead and get that period where it should be, is so much better, right? And yet, his Commerce Secretary is helping fund the climate crisis to fuel it with more publicly financed fossil fuel projects. Now, you know me, I want the government out of all subsidies, all fossil fuel projects, but that's not even enough. We need massive taxes to drive people away from the plant destroying black oil, black stuff, black gold, whatever you want to call it. So here's Raimondo and our allies, our heroes, my heroes, the climate defiance.
Pull out of.
We need clean air, not another. We need clean air, not another billionaire. We need clean air, not another billionaire. We need clean air, not another billionaire. Hey, stop it! Let's go! We need clean air, not another billionaire. 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 Stop assaulting me! Stop assaulting me! Stop assaulting me! We need clean air, not another billionaire. We need clean air, not another billionaire.
All right, I'm going to stop it here for a minute, but I'm going to play the whole clip. It's a little over almost 3 minutes long. Generally, at these events and the ones I've been to, when we have had confrontations with security, with police, they've been pretty, they've been very reluctant, shall we say, to arrest people. They don't put hands on you, or they try not to. This was changed a little bit when we were on the Hill. Was it last week, right? When we interrupted a Congress hearing. But even then, they really seemed to kind of use kid gloves to the degree they possibly could. That really changed here. One of the reasons is at the Wilson Center, so that's the D.C. government. It isn't the D.C., Raimondo is obviously federal, but it's at the John Wilson Center. You can see that, so it's not on the Capitol Hill. I think the police are a little bit less worried about a bad photo op in front of in Congress itself. So that's one of the reasons. I think they're just getting sick of it. Climate Defiance has done an amazing job interrupting these photo ops for the drillers, for the drilling allies and the drillers themselves. Raimondo, one of the worst. Wall Street, Exim Bank, a constant, always a supporter. Was never for having some kind of, investments that were clean green energy. And here, they're interrupting her, and the police are getting a little more handsy, a little more aggressive. We'll see some pictures of that.
We need clean air, not another billionaire. We need clean air, not another billionaire. We need clean air, not another billionaire. And fossil fuels, and fossil fuels, Gina.
So you can see Jay Waxley. Remember, he was my guest the other was it Friday, I believe, or Thursday last week? And you might want to watch that video. It's a great, one of my best ones, I think, one of the best live streams, because Jay was on it. So you can see him there, and you just watch him with the End Fossil Fuels shirt. He's going to get pushed around.
Let go of me! End fossil fuels! End fossil fuels, Gina! End fossil fuels! End fossil fuels, Gina! End fossil fuels! End fossil fuels, Gina! End fossil fuels! End fossil fuels!
So totally nonviolent protest, and they're really trying to shove Jay out of there. And I'm not sure under what, theory. I guess it's trespassing. And I love that chant, end fossil fuels, Gina. She is not an ally. Biden is not an ally. We are facing perhaps the gravest crisis humankind has faced, right? It's not saying this is, intrinsically at the same level of evil, although arguably one could make that claim as the Holocaust, which, remember, I'm Jewish, so that was my ancestors and cousins and second and third cousins and stuff who were gassed. And I will say, in terms of the evil of the people involved, maybe you could make an argument that the Holocaust or slavery were even more evil. But this is, in terms of the actual threat to humanity, perhaps at a level we have never seen. In terms of the threat to everyone, that is closer to the nuclear holocaust. So I'm going to stop this. We'll finish off the video. All right, so I wanted to platform that. I also want to, again, give a little bit of props. Of course, was on, I believe, well, you can see it's a C-SPAN video. I took that from, I believe, Fox News. So again, Fox doing a little bit better than CNN, than MSNBC when it comes to covering these really important issues. And, Armando is a disaster. He's a disaster. All right, before we're going to finish off with Dr. West, but I just want to have a couple more orca pictures and a little more on the orcas because, yeah, they're just magnificent. And what we're doing to them, I mean, it's a crime. It's just, there's no other word. It's just a crime against, in this case, against the web of life, against creation. So they're those beautiful resident orcas. This is a picture taken, I believe, in Puget Sound, and you can see those dorsal fins high. If you go to, and I do not recommend it, but if you ever go to, I don't even know if they still have those anymore, right? The wet world, what do they call it, where you have the orcas and stuff, like you had Shamu, the killer whale. Their dorsal fins are flapped over because they're not like wild. They're captive. They're in prison. They're depressed. So there's whales happily hunting, but unfortunately not so happy because they can't find nearly enough salmon or big enough salmon. The salmon are a lot smaller now too. They used to find 100-pound, close to 170, 80-pound salmon in Puget Sound, and in the Pacific now they're 30 pounds. Those king salmon. They're not kings anymore. They're kind of like little princes, I guess, and little princesses. They're not kings and queen salmons anymore. It's really, this is what makes me cry. This is what makes me tear up more than anything else. All right, one more slide in the orcas. Yeah, and this is what I said. The causal link to the decline in the orca population is based on the studies discovered there have been a significant decrease in the salmon population between 79 and 2020. So 41 years, if I did my math right. Lack of prey is forcing the orcas or killers to spend more energy than needed, leading to an energy deficit. That means that they're dying off, they're less energetic, there's less babies being born because it takes a lot of energy for a mother orca, right, for a female orca to carry a baby orca to gestation. It's not like laying eggs, right? They actually, carry the infants to term. They can't do it. They just can't. They don't go into estrus. And we are especially seeing this, of course, increasing in recent years as we've seen that climate crisis become worse than ever. All right, let's see if we can I want to get this video. I'm hoping it's going to work. Here's Dr. West. This is why we support him. If this doesn't work, folks, I'll get it for you in a different way. Let's see if it's still processing, though. It shouldn't still be processing. No, it isn't. Vote for Cornel.
When you have both parties
president.
so tied to fossil fuel,
you get that there. I'm gonna get
industries, so tied to the old school of coal and gas and oil that is not open to new forms of, it could be solar energy, a variety of different forms that would try to address the ecological catastrophe that is already taking place. It's already in process. So for me, it goes back in so many ways to just organized greed. And the organized greed at the top, like a fossil fuel industry that's preoccupied with short-term profit, we're right back to predatory capitalist processes here. And when you buy off your politicians, when you colonize a whole political class or political group of elected officials, the voices of the people can't get through. When you have.
All right, so that was the. I'm going to play it one more time because I was fiddling around a little bit. I want you to hear it from beginning. No one running for president is talking anywhere like this. Nobody. In either party, neither of the duopolies are ever talking like this. Bernie didn't talk like this. Vote for Dr. Cornel West.
When you have both parties so tied to fossil fuel industries, so tied to the old school of coal and gas and oil that is not open to new forms of, it could be solar energy, a variety of different forms that would try to address the ecological catastrophe that is already taking place. It's already in process. So for me, it goes back in so many ways to just organized greed. And the organized greed at the top, like a fossil fuel industry that's preoccupied with short-term profit, we're right back to predatory capitalist processes here. And when you buy off your politicians, when you colonize a whole political class or political group of elected officials, the voices of the people can't get through. When you have.
All right. Thanks so much for being part of Halitics. And I'll be back tomorrow. Remember, vote for Dr. Cornel West for president.